Welcome back, Kyle. This is Max of the Accidental Engineer here. We have the pleasure of Kyle rejoining us. Kyle Feeley, Director of User Experience at EverQuote in Boston, Massachusetts, USA. We talked last time about tech conferences and are they worth going to, what to look for in them. Today, we're going to talk about a subject that Kyle spent a big chunk of his career on so far, which is WordPress. WordPress is the popular website management tool built on top of the programming language PHP, which Facebook was originally built with. So I've given a kind of a brief summary of what WordPress is, but do you mind sharing, Kyle, for us what exactly it was that you yourself did with WordPress for a number of years?
Sure. So I did custom theme development for a number of clients that I had. Um, just like a lot of small business owners, a lot of freelancers, people who wanted a kind of custom branded website experience, but wanted to be able to control the content and update the content themselves. Sometimes I did some content management stuff if it was like a larger client and I could just get some ongoing business from them by doing that. But for the most part, I would kind of come in, swoop in, do some branding with them, and then develop a WordPress-based website for them. Yeah.
So how did you originally come to find WordPress and adopt it as a skill in your tool set as a developer?
So I actually don't remember the answer to that question. And then I think I've known about WordPress for as long as I've known about the internet. Like, I feel like, I mean, obviously it's not as old as when I got on for like, way back in the day, because I'm super old. So like the first time I got on the internet was like AOL, dial up. But I think WordPress was built in like the mid 90s, I want to say. So I was aware of it as a blogging platform, and I knew people who had like .wordpress.com sites. But yeah, I can't really remember how I got into it exactly. It just seemed like it was always around. And I kind of came into it, I think, mostly from just having a viable way of making a living as a web designer and a web developer.
Mm-hmm.
I just did a lot of research when I was teaching myself CSS and when I was teaching myself HTML and JavaScript. Like, it's just so ubiquitous that it's around, and I think I just came across it that way. Yeah.
So there's a bit of a weird story about how WordPress rose to be as huge as it is, which was that there was a predecessor to WordPress called Movable Type. I don't know if you've ever heard of that.
Yes, I barely remember something about it.
There was a fiasco where Movable Type tried to change their open source license
Okay.
and try to extract more money from people who were developing websites and blogs on Movable Type. And everybody switched over en masse over to WordPress. And
Because it
so
was open source, yeah.
yeah, and for probably the better part of a decade or two, as you said,
Yeah.
WordPress has kind of dominated this very large base of customers who want to be able to manage content and their website, like you say.
Yeah, yeah. And when I was starting out, WordPress was it, right? Like, that was really the platform that you wanted to use. There wasn't Squarespace. Like, if you wanted to have like a custom website with your own URL that wasn't like piggybacking on, what was it, like Blogspot and Blogger at the time or whatever, then then you needed to have a WordPress site or something like that. And I think some people knew about Joomla and some people knew about Drupal, because those were kind of, those are pretty well established at the time when I was picking it up. But WordPress is what people remember and knew and were aware of. Yeah.
The WordPress economy, for those who don't know, is enormous. And like you were saying earlier, you worked on some theme development. Like, do you mind sharing for people who don't know just what the WordPress economy is composed of? Like, what are people paying for? What are people getting out of WordPress?
Sure. So there are, in terms of economy, in terms of like making money, there, I think with WordPress theme development, there are a few routes. One of them, which is the one that I chose, was developing custom themes for clients, small, medium-sized businesses, well, sometimes large businesses. And they just want to have their own branding and their own user experience and UI and everything else. And that's incredibly valuable when you're trying to set yourself apart and present this professional front, right? Like if you send somebody to, a .WordPress site, a .blogger site at the time, like it just looked cheap and you didn't look like a pro. And so, so that would be like the WordPress app basically, or the application itself.
So when somebody's making their website for the first time, do they buy a theme? Is that the idea? Or do people go through themes over time, or? So
that's the other option, right? So like I built custom WordPress sites for people. The other option is that a lot of developers make is building WordPress themes. And those themes are usually somewhat customizable within themselves. But I never really got into that sort of marketplace aspect of things. I really I rather enjoyed dealing with clients directly and kind of going through the branding exercise and kind of helping them develop an online identity. And so WordPress theme was a really good route for that. But I know people who've made a ton of money just doing WordPress theme development, which is you build a generic theme that is customizable, and then you can sell that on a platform like, oh God, what are the name of? There was a couple. ThemeForest is one of them. Yeah. And so people make a ton of money doing that. And that's kind of the other route that I know of. The third route that I know of is being a WordPress developer for like enterprise clients. So there are some pretty large companies with large websites that are surprisingly still run off of WordPress.
Sure.
They usually require a lot of custom build out. So there are some agencies that hire theme developers to kind of manage those sort of like larger enterprise clients.
Just to name two real quick, there's TechCrunch. TechCrunch was originally a WordPress blog and still is. Yep. And I believe the New Yorker, they host their website off WordPress too. Yeah.
I'm still surprised at how many still do.
Yeah.
But I think that it's a pretty good, solid content management system. And it's obviously in active development. Like, I know a ton of WordPress theme agencies for some of these larger enterprise clients who they have developers who spend their full time working on WordPress core. So they actually donate some of their employees' time to building out, this open source software, which is awesome. So, yeah.
So what skills do you have to acquire to do WordPress theme plugin development? I know there's some HTML, some CSS. Was it a good intro into software development?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a low barrier to entry.
Okay.
Which is great. So you can get a lot of sort of free open source themes that are sort of like static boilerplate themes that you can customize. And so if you've been able to teach yourself CSS and HTML and then just a little bit of JavaScript, jQuery, you can start building out custom themes based on these boilerplates. So that's just a really easy way to get going and to build your own site. So that's just strictly the theme development. When you want to start getting into the more plugin route, you have to be a little bit more. Obviously, it depends on how sophisticated the plugin is, but you have to be pretty savvy with JavaScript, pretty savvy with PHP, and you can just start kind of dipping your toe in kind of just functional and object-oriented programming in PHP. And I think that's a great way of doing it, especially since you can see WordPress is really well annotated, and so you can get a lot of feedback just by reading the code that includes the comments, and understand how like a large scale application is put together. And for me, that was really important. Like, I think that they really support developers and especially the WordPress community is for the most part very supportive and encouraging of new developers who are coming into it. And so, so all those things combined, I mean, it's a low barrier to entry, and on top of that, you get a ton of support from the community. So it's a great way to learn. The only caveat to that is that PHP itself is not the easiest language to learn, just because I personally find it a bit convoluted. I find that like a language like Ruby is easier to learn just because it reads more like English. I think it's just a bit more straightforward. Python, I think, is another language that is like that. But PHP can have some quirks to it that make it a little difficult to use sometimes.
Yeah, PHP has a long history of having a lot of security flaws, and one of the things I remember WordPress being well known for over the last decade has been just the series of targeted attacks that WordPress sites have faced. That's kind of the big downside of being a super popular tool, is that when a lot of people use a tool, it becomes the biggest target for security exploits and hackers. So I remember that being a big issue.
Yeah, and it's the last thing you want to hear from a client is when you built them a site and then, a year later they come back and they haven't been updating the WordPress version, and they haven't been updating their plugins. There are these vulnerabilities, and all of a sudden they've become this bot for spam. And so,
For people who don't know PHP or don't want to know PHP, a lot of WordPress's market share has been attacked recently by these web page builder type services like Squarespace or Wix.com or Weebly. So is there much of a marketplace for theme development or plugin development or HTML, CSS tweaking of websites that are built using those?
Shrinking.
It's shrinking?
Yeah, I think it's shrinking. I mean, that's entirely subjective opinion, right? Like I don't have data to back that up, but I do know fewer developers who go into the theme, WordPress theme route, and I personally wouldn't use WordPress, knowing what I know now, but I think it's still a great solution for small and medium-sized businesses, and I think too that WordPress has the advantage of the fact that they've had a lot of developers working a long time with a lot of feedback on how to get a content management system right. I've used some of those, sort of WYSIWYG website builders like Squarespace, and the user experience and the UI can be a bit confusing. And the thing about building a WordPress theme is, once you build it, you have to hand it over to your client. And some of my clients were not very tech savvy, or they didn't have the resources to hire somebody to update their WordPress site for them. So as a result, they needed a tool that was very user-friendly. And WordPress has spent a lot of time in their development over the years making the back end more friendly. Well, I mean, I said the back end, but the logged in experience, yeah.
So is there much skills crossover to kind of better paying salaried roles in software engineering from WordPress development? Like for your team at EverQuote, where you're running the user experience front-end team, is there much crossover in terms of skills? Like, would you consider hiring a candidate whose primary work experience has been with WordPress?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I was hired by the company EverQuote, that I'm at now. I didn't know Rails or Ruby when I started, and some could make the argument that I don't still know it very well, but I mean, but like, I know my way around, and I didn't know anything about it coming into it. I think PHP and Ruby are both C based languages. I mean, that's where their history is from. They're coming from the same logic. So, there's a lot of things that are very similar. You notice, how they handle loops, and if else statements. I mean, all that stuff is the same. So I would kind of assert that, if you know one programming language fairly well, you are at least going to be more likely to be able to pick up another language really well, sort of like knowing Spanish and being able to pick up French. And so I think a lot of developers are willing to take a chance on you. And for us, we're hiring front-end people, and the front end stays the same, right? CSS, HTML, and JavaScript are all still part of the equation. So yeah, absolutely. If you had a rockstar WordPress developer, I'm fairly confident that they would become a rock star, any developer, if they were given the opportunity to do that.
For sure. Now, one of the last topics I wanted to ask you about, and that I know is one of the popular features of WordPress, is how good it is for optimizing websites to be scraped by Google and optimized for search engine optimization, or SEO. So do you mind sharing a little bit about what SEO is real quick, and why WordPress has been the go-to solution for making websites that will show up in Google search results?
So the reason that WordPress is the go-to option is mostly because they got into it first. I think Drupal and Joomla and plenty of other frameworks now get that formula right, but WordPress was the first to get it right, just out of the box. And that if you were using the product just the way that it was being presented to you, things were being categorized correctly in terms of the URL routing. And then also it was inherently adding meta tags, and basically that's what SEO is based on. SEO is based on semantic HTML markup. So if your HTML is being used correctly, it is based on meta tags and making sure that the correct information the correct metadata is being appended in the head. And then the other thing is the URL routes themselves, that the routes make sense, that the names correspond with the content, that there's a certain logic to it. And WordPress was really the first, or not, maybe not the first, but like definitely one of the best sort of free, open source resources to get that out of the box, and that you didn't have to spend a ton of time thinking about setting all that stuff up for yourself. It's already there.
Yeah, they'd reached critical mass, and basically anyone anywhere who was interested in SEO would kind of contribute their knowledge about how to structure your HTML and your URLs of your website back into the WordPress community. So anyone who was using WordPress could relatively easily take advantage of all of the tips and advice and tools that other members of the WordPress community were creating and discovering. So yeah, that's one of the...
Sorry, there's such a robust like plugin development and free plugin development community associated with WordPress. So you're right. If anybody figured out any like tricks with SEO, they could easily build a plugin and share it for free or for money, which plenty of people do. As well they should.
As well they should. Awesome. Well, thank you, Kyle. I'm sure we'll be back again next time with another topic of similar interests.
I can't wait.
Appreciate for having you on.
Thanks.